We have Chris Clegg, Chris Crawford, and Chris Welsh, as I had to make the trifecta of Chris's for one event. I had
was
to do it. You
wondering
can call it the
how.
christening
Yeah.
at PitchCon.
I was
So
wondering if it was a coincidence, is what I was coming up with while I was waiting in there, and I
it was
understand if
not. I
everybody
sat down
just
and was like,
loved the
I'm
chat.
absolutely going to do this. It's almost a requested podcast. This is
Phenomenal.
hilarious to me.
Beautiful.
But anyway, Welsh, stop shaking your head. You know you love it. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to let you guys take it away.
All right, goodbye. See ya. Forgive me, my voice is a little bit hoarse here, so I'll be working through this. I'm going to be hosting our panel here of Chris's. This is like the council of Chris's, the council of Mortys, if you will. Maybe better people, maybe no guarantees or anything like that. Chris Clegg on Twitter at Roto Clegg, over here at PitcherList, who I've done plenty of podcasts with. First off, Mr. Roto Clegg, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing good. It's good to be on the Chris panel, and I'm looking forward to talking some prospects.
Okay, definitely one of our top Chris's. Chris Crawford, I've not had the pleasure to communicate with outside of recently on the Twitter, formerly over at Roto World, now over at RotoWire. Congratulations on the RotoWire hire. I actually just had James Anderson on my show, Prospect One, and we gave you a mention coming over there. So you're going to be doing prospects and more over at RotoWire, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, doing a bunch of stuff over there. Really excited to be over there, and checks in the mail for talking about me. Thanks, bud.
There we go. That's how I do it. You guys can find me, Prospect One, probably one of the shows you would care about, but also I'm literally everywhere right now. So I'm oversaturated in the market. Hopefully I don't talk too much here. Also why my voice is going down. So this was an interesting panel that we were put on and we were given, because contextually it doesn't have to do with this year. Also, it isn't really, at least I took it as a non-dynasty based question. I think it's actually a good way to look at next year, because it was called 2024 top rookies. Now, had it said 2024 number one overall prospect, we probably would be talking more dynasty. So what we're going to do here is we're going to be talking about what we think the top rookies will look like at the beginning of next year. And why that could also be important to this year is this is us projecting players we don't think are going to cross those limits this year. And that's what's fascinating about it. The first thing I want to bring up, and we've also, a big thing you guys might care about, you guys are welcome to jump in the chat on anything. You guys love lists. We love lists. We make lists. We consistently can't stop making lists. We are manic and crazy about it. We made a list, and we made our top 10 2024 rookies for the 2024 season for redraft. And we'll also talk about who missed it and everything like that. So we'll be good on that. But one of the things I wanted to bring up, and Crawford, we'll start with you on this, that rookie debuts and impact in general has changed. And we kind of were introduced to that this past year. I was just on Fantasy Pros talking about, I was very loud, vocal, and critical last year in January when people were drafting Julio Rodriguez, because I was like, it's not going to happen. This is a 20-year-old kid. They're not going to bring him up. They've got Kelnick. They've got a glut of outfield, blah, 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 blah. And then guess what? They did. And little did we know the changes that baseball made for extra compensation for picks and everything like that really was going to change it. Arbitration. It moved into a place where teams are manipulating less. There's a manipulation that can be had on the back end. They're manipulating a little bit less. And we didn't have the full scope of how rookies were going to be going on. Though what I would say, I still don't think we have a full scope. And that's kind of what's going on with this year. I'm just curious at your overall take on how rookies are truly going to be impacted, because I see this year going exactly like last year. There's two rookies at the top that everybody is paying out their butt for. They're paying for Gunnar Henderson and Corbin Carroll. But guess what? No one's projecting Jordan Walker. No one's projecting Oscar Colas. They're not projecting any of these other guys, and they're going in the 250s. Guess what? If they're given a job, they will immediately fly up. So we're still doing what we did last year. What's your take on the rookie landscape and how they're going to be pushed through, especially based off of what we got last year?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And, you know, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, too, that we need some more data points with this. We need to find out how much this was, because I talked to some folks about this, too, that it wasn't just that, you know, the new rules came. It was kind of a perfect storm of these rookies who were ready to make their debuts, and also franchises that needed to have these rookies make their debuts. You guys go back to Kevin Mather and those despicable comments that he made about Julio Rodriguez and Jared Kelnick. They weren't going to screw that up again. Julio Rodriguez only had to have a good spring training to make that team. The Kansas City Royals have kind of learned it's not worth screwing over your best prospect and getting an extra year of eligibility and making him very upset for his time being there. Detroit looked like they were going to be contenders, and Riley Green would have made that roster and Spencer Torkelson. So, yeah, I do think it was the rule thing that helped with that, but also just like a perfect storm of rookies who were ready to make contributions for teams that were looking to win more baseball games. I think it's going to be really, I think, though, we are going to see stuff like that. Like Corbin Carroll and Gunnar Henderson are going to make rosters. Oscar Colas has a great shot to make the Chicago White Sox roster. Jordan Walker is probably going to have to just like hit 750 in the Grapefruit League to make the team, but a guy who has a chance to make an early contribution. I really think that we're seeing a change here where, yes, it's partially rules, and then part of it is you don't want to upset these guys because you're robbing Peter to pay Paul in this situation. You are upsetting keystones of your franchise by not having them be part of their roster. So yeah, I think it's a changing landscape, but I do want to see a little more data before I go too crazy about it, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, it does. And Clegg, one of the interesting things moving through this that I think, and I just said, like, I still think we look very much like we did last year, where it's like there's a couple guys and then a couple are going to happen. I believe that what we see happen in spring training and the beginning of this year might change the landscape of what actually happens next year for us in fantasy, because I don't think we're doing anything too different, even though baseball is doing it different. Corbin Carroll and Gunnar Henderson are given jobs, but we saw that happen last year, even if it's through April. Do you think we are kind of like what I'm saying? Do you think that this year is mirroring a little bit of last year, and then the correction is going to come next year where rookies are going to kind of rise to the top more, as we lost Chris Crawford? He'll come back, I promise.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I kind of agree. Like, I think we almost need a little more data. I think last year, as Crawford mentioned, it was kind of the perfect storm. I mean, the prospects that missed the pandemic year, some of them developed in ways that we didn't see at the alt side. And then the full 2021 season happened. Some of the players were just ready. And we had a lot of players ready, I think, that were kind of set back from 2020. So it created an opportunity for prospects to come up that were ready. Now, I think there's more incentives for these prospects to come up early in the season because the things like the draft pick, like you can get extra draft pick if they win, rookie of the year, finish. There's all the stipulations for it. And because of that, it certainly encourages some teams to do so and bring them up early. Now, is every team going to do that? No. I mean, I still think we see teams manipulate and keep these guys down longer than need to be, but especially if a team is borderline ready to contend. Let's take the Mariners last year. I mean, they felt like they could compete. And so Julio Rodriguez was a missing piece to that puzzle. It brought him up and he was excellent. So who will we see this year? I mean, it's clear that Gunnar Henderson's going to make the roster. Corbin Carroll's going to make the roster, but Baltimore could be on the verge of contention. So we could see these other prospects, get a shot with Baltimore. Now, other teams, I don't know, like Jordan Lawler's one where I don't think he debuts this year. I left him off the list and we're going to talk about him for 2024 because I just don't think that they're going to push him this year. And I think next year could be the year where he really comes and is that guy.
Yeah, and there's a potential flood that could happen. And Tovar is going to be at the top of what we're going to talk about here. Just looking over also, by the way, over the last couple of years, 2021, when you want to talk about the rookies, because I think there's two ways we look at rookies in redraft formats here. There's the rookies that debut and break camp, and those are the ones that we go crazy about. And then there's rookies that end up impacting in season. And that's what our lists are going to kind of struggle with a little bit when we're putting that together. And in years past, 2021, we saw Wander Franco, who debuted, I think, around June. Jonathan India broke camp. Jared Kelnick came up. And then at the back end of the year, I think it was in October, we saw Spencer Strider and O'Neill Cruz both make debuts. So that was kind of, in a space where none of this weird stuff was going on. Then we come into last year, Bobby Witt, Julio Rodriguez were your big guys. Spencer Torkelson was put in there. The effect of positive production, especially when you look at versus 2021. Wander, when he came up, 7 homers, 2 stolen bases, 288 over 70 games, pretty good. Jared Kelnick, 14 homers, 16 stolen bases over 93 games, but a 181 batting average, not good. Jonathan India was phenomenal, 21 and 12 on homers and stolen bases with a 269 over a full season. And then Strider and Cruz were just interesting, but nothing else. Last year, Bobby Witt and Julio Rodriguez go through the roof. Torkelson is your big fall down. And then this year, as you kind of said, Corbin Carroll's got an NFBC ADP of 72. Gunnar Henderson's got an NFBC ADP of 92. So those are your top 100 guys. Jordan Walker has an ADP in the NFBC of 258 with a high of 191. And I'm telling you, you're going to see him change if they give him a gig. If they give Jordan Walker's is going to be handed the reins. I truly think that you're going to see him go and push inside the top 100 or something like that. As well on the list, you've got Oscar Colas, who's 373 with a high of 303. By the way, if Nick is around, you got to add Chris Crawford back. I can't. I don't have access. Yeah. So bring Chris Crawford back in because I can't bring him in, and also change our banner. Though I could be Bubba, you could be Stampful, and then Crawford's going to have to be Ronus in here. So we're missing a Chris. So shouting to the rooftop, someone add Chris Crawford back so he can get in here because I cannot do it. But that's the general sense of the last 3 years of kind of the early impact and players that we all relatively considered that are going into this. And that's where we get into the list. And I hate to do this without Crawford. So if someone can bring him back in. 2 guys, let's do this before we get to the list. 2 guys that missed this list for us. Elly De La Cruz and Anthony Volpe. There we go. Oh, there's Nick. You got to ask Crawford. There you go. Thank you, buddy. He's back. Where is Nick? Where are you? What is he doing?
He needed to answer that.
This is a panel. What is he getting? Coffee? Ridiculous. No respect for the rookies. No, Clegg, you're over here now. Get that fixed. The disrespect from the bagel guy right there. All right. So I kind of set the stage for what some of the rookies are. Impact is subjective. Jonathan India was your big 2020 impact guy with some big prospects that come up. Okay. Bobby Witt, Julio Rodriguez go through the roof. Torkelson, huge down. We see where the costs are now. 2 people that will not be on our list were Elly De La Cruz and Anthony Volpe. I believe, Clegg, you struggled a little bit with adding them and having them on. Crawford and I both had kind of come to the consensus that we think both of these players are going to exhaust eligibility. So understand, if there's a person that's not on this list, we're talking about eligibility. No Gunnar, no Corbin Carroll, no Jordan Walker is going to be on here. And then we are coming to the assumption that Elly De La Cruz will come up at some point this season. And we're also coming to the assumption that Anthony Volpe is going to come up this season and exhaust eligibility. So our scope here is these players are gone. But Crawford, since we've been chatting so much, talk to us real quick about just Elly and Anthony Volpe not being on this list, because obviously if they were eligible, I want to say, I think Chris had Elly at number 1, and we'll get to you in a second, Clegg. But like, if I had both of these guys on this list, they would be inside my top 3. I would have Volpe and Cruz, probably have Volpe at 1, if I'm being honest. And then I would probably go Lawler and De La Cruz if they did not exhaust eligibility. How would you rank out Elly versus Volpe if they were still there?
Sure. Yeah. I think at the very least, they're in that top 3 just because of the fact that I think they're 5 category players. I think they are guys who, and play position, the positional value obviously helps a lot. I think we're more likely to see Volpe exhaust his eligibility than De La Cruz just because of some positional stuff. I just think the Yankees probably, this could be a hot take, need Anthony Volpe to be a contender if they're going to be a guy who can help them make the postseason. And I like him an awful lot. He'd be a guy that if I could sneak an IL guy and put him on my roster to hang on to for a while, he'd be definitely a guy I consider, just because that ability to hit for power and steal bases is really impressive from the shortstop position. But I imagine that both of these guys are going to get enough playing time that they wouldn't qualify. But if they did qualify, they would be right near the top.
Yeah, it's just an imagination game that we had to play. So, like, obviously people are going to might be upset. Well, I have this guy, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's an imagination game we're playing where we're assuming.
Sure.
And also, one thing we know about prospects at this point is we know nothing. Like, we don't know how these teams are going to go. One thing I would point out about this, Jordan Lawler does make this list, and we're going to talk about him. The Diamondbacks they've aggressively moved him all the way up to AA. He was in the Arizona Fall League here. Sure. Injuries have been a problem. They've already talked about this being a potential spot where he comes up this year. I would not be shocked if he exhausts eligibility. So we did took it upon our liberty here to keep some players on that might exhaust and take some players off that might not. But Clegg, you had Ellie De La Cruz at the very top of yours. So obviously I think you agree with Crawford. If he were there next year, he would be a top guy. But we're all kind of positively telling everybody, hey, Ellie really might make an impact this season, and he's going to be a late waiver wire we need to take a look at.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible. And I include him just because the Reds are just going to be so far from contention, I think. And I just don't really see them bringing him up this year, except maybe at the end of the year, which would mean he probably doesn't exhaust that eligibility. So again, I was torn on both De La Cruz and Volpe, put them both on the list, and y'all two didn't. So we're not going to go in detail, but I would say it's probably 50-50 on whether they exhaust eligibility or not. But I would say Volpe's more likely to exhaust just because the Yankees are going to be contenders. And if they need his bat down the stretch and don't make a trade for a big time shortstop, at the deadline or something, then Volpe could be that guy, especially if Oswald Peraza is struggling. Because I think they're going to give Peraza a chance early in the season. And if it just doesn't pan out, that chance may go to Volpe. So we'll see. But De La Cruz, I would say, there's certainly a chance he gets a cup of coffee at the end of the year, but I'm not sure he exhausts eligibility. It may be like the Gunnar and Carroll situation. So that's kind of where my brain went.
And you know what? I wouldn't hate even if we had him on here at the end of the day, because I agree he's a little bit, I don't know where to go with it. Someone in the chat asked about Noelvi Marte, and this might be a little bit of a hot take. I think the Reds will go to Noelvi before they go to Ellie De La Cruz. Noelvi's obviously moved positions, which is a little bit tougher as he's matured through. Clegg, you and I saw him at the Arizona Fall League. I haven't seen him since he was, before he even debuted pro stateside out here in Arizona when he was a Mariner. And he's gotten way bigger. His swing has gotten a little bit wonky. He has some stuff to work on defensively, but this is a guy at that position. I think they could push him. I feel like there might be a little bit more babying that goes on with Ellie De La Cruz. And, if you guys aren't familiar listening here, Ellie De La Cruz across 2 levels last year had 28 homers and over 40 stolen bases, like absurd numbers. But, it was 47 games at AA. He might start at AA again. Then he hits AAA. And we just don't know what side he's going to sit on at the end of this. And there's a lot of interesting prospects. But I agree, Volpe is a guy, also homer, stolen bases, who will 100% exhaust eligibility. Here are guys that we don't think are going to exhaust eligibility. And at the end, we will also give you guys our top 10. Our full top 10 will give you, because I've made categories out of all of these. And the first category is the top 2. Because we had a relative consensus between the 3 of us, which is actually really surprising. Also because we took Ellie De La Cruz off here. Number 1, Jackson Chourio, and he was not my number 1. Crawford and Clegg, you both had Jackson Chourio as the number 1 rookie for 2024. I had him at number 2. So let's start there. Clegg, let's start with you. Jackson Chourio was started this time last year, was going to maybe play complex ball, was in extended spring training. If you guys don't know what that is, it's practice. It's nothing. When full season minor league started, he was hanging back on the backfields for 2 months to play in complex. He started hitting 110 plus EVs. He was blowing everyone's mind. And they said, let's give him a shot at low A. Well, guess what? The guy pushed it up to AA. It's unreal, the move he made at his age. And this designation of being the number 1 says you think he might get a cup of coffee later next year, or is going to be breaking the roster, because we wouldn't put a guy at number 1 if they don't have a shot to make the roster on the beginning of the 2024 season, Clegg.
Yeah, he's an interesting one just because of age. So it feels a bit aggressive in a way. He'll turn 19 the beginning of March. So he'll be 19 for the season, spent all of last year at 18, obviously. And doing what he did was just special, to put it in terms. I mean, he had a 160 WRC plus in low A, which was the highest by an 18-year-old since Giancarlo Stanton. So you got to go back a good ways to actually get someone that performed at that level at that age in low A. I mean, the numbers were just eye-popping. I mean, he had 439 plate appearances and ended up making it to AA at the end of the year, where he hit 20 home runs, and even slumping in AA, he slashed 288, 342, 538. The exit velocities, as you mentioned, he was popping them around in extended spring training. And even I would say his EVs weren't like the most impressive for the full season ball, but you have to go back and think about his age and how old he was. I mean, he had an 89 mile an hour average EV at 18. His 90th percentile was 102.5. Like, those things are just really, really good. His hard hit over 40%. Like, you love to see numbers like that out of an 18-year-old. There's some swing and miss concerns, but I mean, for someone for the team to be that aggressive with him and push him all the way to AA as an 18-year-old. And yes, it was just for a very small amount of time at the end of the year, but still, that shows you what they think about Churio. I think he ends up being the top prospect in baseball at some point, whether it's, after Gunnar and Corbin Carroll graduate. But I think that potential is certainly there for him.
Well, and I want to designate there is a difference between being the top prospect in baseball and then the top rookie in baseball, which is a difficult thing here. Here would be a retort I'm going to give to you, Crawford. And by the way, we are full on going high school. We're calling each other all by last names. There's no Chris's. So the council of Chris's can live in the chat. We need to make sure we're last names. But one of my problems is exactly what Clegg just said. I actually wanted to move Churio down a little bit because there's also a guy named Sal Frelick. They've got Garrett Mitchell up. They've got Frelick. They've got Yelich. They've got Winker. Star, amazing, talented players can't really truly be held back at the end of the day. Here's my worry. Churio's swing and miss, if it comes to this season in the aggressive assignment, that the team decides we are going to go full board AA and then a cup of coffee AAA. Then he plays in the AFL. And then he comes back to AAA to start the year. So my question is, they've actually got some good outfielders. They've got Yelich. They've got Garrett Mitchell. Good. Frelick, I really like. Are you worried that Churio can't actually make the roster to start 2024, which would hurt the ability of him being a top rookie like Corbin Carroll and Gunnar in redrafts next year?
Yeah, that's absolutely one of the reasons why there was no slam dunk for me. I honestly considered who we have at number 2 as well for the number 1 spot. And I think there's similar concerns for that number 2 player that we'll talk about in just a sec as well. But ultimately, I just think talent-wise, like I think in terms of a fantasy list, Jackson Churio is the best fantasy prospect in baseball. And I think that the fact he can do basically everything you want from a fantasy prospect, I have to have him at that number 1 spot. I was so impressed. By the way, I've got a bunch of first Bowmans for him, so I'm just trying to sell the value. That's all I'm doing right now. I'm not really. I don't know if he's a good bait. No, I'm just kidding. Totally kidding. But man, that was such an impressive debut. And the people I talked to and watching the videos, man, this guy can flat out play baseball. And it's hyperbolic maybe to compare him to guys like Julio Rodriguez, but the skill set is not that far from Julio Rodriguez if everything maxes out. And there's a ton of volatility based on the fact he has I think it was 23 at bats in AA to end the year. Holy crap, though. I've never seen a prospect rise like this before, by the way. I've seen guys who we haven't heard of or not getting talked about quite a bit, end up being top 75, top 50 prospects. To go from where he was to being legitimately being considered in organizations as one of the best outfield prospects in baseball, if not the best outfield prospect in baseball, is borderline unheard of. But again, there is that risk of the fact that they're going to take their time. By the way, Joey Weimer is another guy that they have there that I'm a fan of. I think that they're goofy expletive swing, but there's some impressive athleticism there as well. They do have some options, so that is certainly something to consider. But if you had to ask me who's going to be the top rookie for 2024, I have to go Churio.
By the way, if anyone plays the game here, you can see to my left, I have a thing of baseballs. I have all through here. This bottom row are all future games ball.
Nice.
And someone can search for the Jackson Churio because it is on there. We have a Jackson Churio future game ball in there. We've also got a ball from number 2 here. The only thing I want to add, the only guy I can think that came close to this, because I agree. The Jackson Churio rise is the craziest thing I've ever seen. What was crazier is he never failed. That was the wildest. We've seen guys do the thing and then all of a sudden they get to high A and then, something like that. That never happened. It was nuts. The closest I can think of as far as a rise goes was, I believe, the 2017 to 2018 rise of Ronald Acuna, because Ronald Acuna wasn't always the number 1 guy. I remember there were many outlets in 16 or 17 that had him around post 100, something like that.
Sure.
And then he all of a sudden became a consensus top 10 prospect within 1 year. And that was the closest, but it's still not the same of what happened with Jackson Churio, which was absolutely bonkers.
No. By the way, it's funny. I remember tweeting when Acuna was making his rise that a scout told me this guy could be the next Adam Jones. And I thought that was high praise. yeah, Adam Jones. All right.
Love to have the nap. Love Adam Jones. Number 2 on this list. Number 2 was my number 1. You guys both had him at 2. So this is why, we were very consensus on this. Jordan Lawler. I do worry a little bit that Jordan Lawler actually might exhaust some eligibility out of this. The Diamondbacks are not afraid. Nick Ahmed is a player that they could move off of if they start to stink and struggle and want to move a Gold Glove shortstop off of. They do have Josh Rojas, and Evan Longoria came to make things more difficult, so they might not push him. But Jordan Lawler, they gave, I mean, underrated. It was kind of a Jackson Churio type rise from where he went. Think about how he got hurt. He missed last year with the injury. He came in, aggressive assignments, boom. All of a sudden, one of the best players in the AFL before, unfortunately, he got hurt again. And this is a guy that is all facets of the game, 5-tool player. I think the Diamondbacks have a system. And this is how I think a lot of teams are going to do it. Because I mentioned it earlier. Hey, no more manipulation at the top of the league starting in the season. Well, guess what? Manipulate on the back end, because if you don't bring a guy up until September, you get him under 130 at bats. He's rookie eligible for next season. And guess what? The Diamondbacks have a phenomenal chance to get a first round compensatory pick if Corbin Carroll wins rookie of the year, because they'll start him from day one. I think they do the same thing with Jordan Lawler. That's where I go with it. And Jordan Lawler's my number one guy on the 5 tools. Clegg, let's go back to you. He was your number 2. I think Jordan Lawler has a better potential to break camp with his team than Jackson Churio. And I have them both next to each other. That's kind of the tier difference, even when we're talking dynasty to redraft. So what made you put Lawler at 2 behind Churio?
I mean, just from a pure like fantasy upside standpoint, like I just prefer Churio, but you're right. I think Lawler has the advantage to potentially debut sooner just because of age. I mean, Lawler will turn 21 midseason in July this year. So, I mean, that puts him a good bit older than Churio, and I couldn't do the math on the fly in my head. But anyway, Lawler certainly belongs in this tier, like the top 2. I think he's like him and Churio are the standouts, like of those guys that we think could debut early next year. And I've always said the best thing about Lawler is the athleticism and the fact that if all else fails, like he's got the speed to fall back on, which makes him such a valuable fantasy asset, even if the power doesn't develop like we hope. And, we saw decent power out of him last year. I'm slightly concerned with some of the EV hard hit numbers, but again, young guy who I think still has plenty of potential to add to that. If all else fails, like it's an impressive, semi power and speed with the potential to be really good power and speed combo, but the speed in fantasy is huge. And so that underrated aspect, I think, is going to really give Lawler an advantage and gives him a higher floor for fantasy purposes just because of that speed itself.
One of my favorite interactions, I've interacted with Lawler in a bunch of different places. If you guys want to go check out my Twitter, is it the Welsh? During the AFL, I was, as I usually am, people know I have like a view and it's front row in between. Clegg has been there with me. Me and him have done videos together and stuff. And Lawler hit this ball in Salt River. He immediately threw the bat down and went, dang. And it kept going and going and going. And he hit a home run. And he comes around the third baseline, and I just yelled to him. I'm like, you didn't think you got that? And he was like, I did not think I got that. And he did. And he just got, I think, like that. There's a raw power that can be tapped into with all full 5-tool abilities that I really love about him. Crawford, kind of same thing. Lawler comes in at number 2 here, a little bit older, better opportunity to make the roster, but he still comes in behind Churio for you.
Yeah, and it's just more compliment to Churio than it is to insult to Lawler. I still cannot believe this guy fell to the 6th pick in that draft.
I know, I'm so happy.
It's what a great get for Arizona and stuff. And all due respect to some names who went ahead of him, who are very good prospects. That draft is going to be one I think we talk about for a very long time. I think the argument that you can make for Lawler on top of Churio is I'm more confident in Lawler stealing bases than I am Churio. It's not a speed thing, but Lawler's baseball acumen is so underrated. He is such a smart player and can do everything you want on the baseball field, just like we were talking about with Churio. He clearly, to me, reads pitchers better, and he's more confident in running. Now, look, there's been some rule stuff that's gone on with stolen bases that I think you have to be really careful about being too excited about. We'll talk about a certain Veen that has stolen an awful lot of bases that may not translate to the next level. But this guy has the speed to absolutely be a 30 stolen base guy. So does Churio. I want to see him actually do it. That is one thing that I would be cognizant of here. But Lawler's ability to do a little bit of everything, if you're going to say who has the higher floor of these two, I think it has to be Jordan Lawler.
Yeah, and I think you're going to be looking at him next year inside the top 100. I think he'll be, I'm not trying to say he's going to be Bobby Witt or anything like that, but he's going to be in that valuation of who are the prospects that we're pushing up, and this would be one of those guys that would be there. Number 3 is interesting because Crawford, he did not make your list. And I'm curious, was it because you think he will exhaust eligibility, or is it another reason? He's number 3 on both Clegg and mine's list. And this is not a consensus because he didn't make yours. It is Kyle Manzardo with all the big hard hit numbers. It's a beautiful swing. There's a lot to love about the guy, and he is a little bit dicey on like where people want to rank him. I know James Anderson has him inside the top 10. Sometimes he's top 15, but really across the board, there's not a lot that Kyle Manzardo doesn't do well, except that he's a first baseman. And then number 2, he plays for the Rays, and the Rays, always a problem. So why didn't he make your list?
I'm a Washington Huskies fan, and if you go to Washington State, I'm just not putting you on a list, man. No, I actually do. I actually do think that Manzardo will exhaust eligibility this year, and that's maybe a hot take. He wouldn't have been in my top 5, to be completely honest. He'd be right around that 6 to 7 range, just because of the first base position. I'm always a little reticent about guys who are going to have to max out offensively in order to me be fantasy relevant, and I think Manzardo will have to do that. That being said, if he does max out, holy crap. I mean, that swing is gorgeous. That is a swing that you should be studying to see what a swing is supposed to look like. We could be talking about, I hate giving this grade, but we could be talking about an 80 hit tool. It's totally possible that he's in that range. If you want to go 65 or 70, that's totally fine with me. Certainly has power. I want to see how he handles velocity, especially from like left-handed starters, and that's something we'll just have to see. To go back to it, like Matt Mervis, one of my biggest concerns is how is he going to handle velocity? Because I don't see elite bat speed there. So I want to see what's going to happen with that. Manzardo is clearly a better prospect than Matt Mervis by a substantial margin. But that's my one concern with him. But if I didn't think that he wasn't going to be playing every day for the Rays by the end of the year, because I really do think that's going to happen. Apparently that's a hot take with you guys. No, that he would absolutely be on that list. But just because I think he's at most a 3 category player is the one concern that I have here.
Yeah, I would say he's actually out here in Arizona training. I'm actually going to be at a thing with him in a week, Kyle Manzardo. So I'm going to ask him lots of questions and
tell him I say go Huskies.
Yeah, go Huskies, exactly. And I'm going to be very interested to see. But someone said in the chat earlier, like, oh, Curtis Mead better be at the top of the list. I actually think Curtis Mead is the guy that has a better opportunity to exhaust his eligibility this year. So he did not make my list for that exact reason, that this team is just chock full of players that they'll put in different positions, and they don't feel obligated to move guys up. The biggest push we've ever really seen was Wander Franco and the commitment. Otherwise, whether it's Josh Lowe moving around, they've got a Rhonda who's going to be out there. I just don't think they're going to make a big push. But it's not even necessarily that it has to be a hot take. It's just that's where we are with him, and we put him here. Clegg, same thing. I mean, Manzardo, we're going to move through a little bit faster on the next ones. But, this was kind of our big core. And I think I felt like you and I were on the same page here, because I felt like this top 3 was a core of what I really felt comfortable with. And Manzardo was on that list, and I think he would be one of those big top bats.
Yeah, I'm just not sure that he exhausts eligibility. He may get some time, but I just don't trust the Rays to push him. I mean, we've seen what the Rays do, and they haven't been overly aggressive outside of like Wander, and Wander is a special talent. So, Manzardo did get 30 games in AA. So that's the only thing. I'm like, does he start in AA, or do they push him and start in AAA next year? Not really sure. I actually saw him a decent bit live in High A. I'm living here in Greenville. They were down here, and man, there is power, like pretty effortless power in this swing too. Like he hit one to dead center, and in Greenville, that's 420, and it was like dead center, just easy swing out. So like, I think he can get some more power. The contact skills are excellent. Like, I don't know. I mean, you can't deny. I mean, you said it, Crawford. You could throw a 7 or 8. Like that's extreme, but that's how good the contact is here. He doesn't chase. He walks as much as he strikes out. Really big fan of that. And the reason I put him here is just from the fact that I don't think the Rays are aggressive enough with him this year, where he doesn't, exhaust the eligibility. Now with the lefty righty thing, like I'm curious by that. And also like the velo too, because honestly, pitching in High A was awful this year, especially in the Sal. Like there was not a lot of good pitchers. So that's obviously something to think about, but he was fine in AA. He actually, put up better numbers, or similar numbers, at least in AA. And the lefty righty splits are okay. I mean, he against lefty /265, 333, 485. Like that's 819 OPS ain't going to put you in a platoon, But again, it's the Rays, so we have to ask
Yeah,
that question.
that's a good point.
Sometimes the Rays actually hand something. Oh, here you go. Here are the
Yeah.
keys.
Yeah.
Not so much. Rays are much more like a lease than they are a purchase. If we're going to say prospects are anything, if they're cars, that you don't purchase them with the Rays, you just lease them for whatever period of time they decide. And you have to bring them in. You can't go over 50 miles. You can't go over 2 years. You know the deal. You can do with that. So
Sure.
now we're going to open up a little bit. You guys can do quick takes. I kind of want to hit you on both of these guys. This is called the all three list. There were only 2 more players that were on all 3 of our lists, and they're fascinating. Zach Veen of the Colorado Rockies and Pete Crow Armstrong. Zach Veen, they've already talked about pushing him this year. I have changed my tune on Zach Veen after watching him in the AFL. Chris, I'm very interested to get your take on Zach Veen. And then, Clegg, I want to talk to you about Pete Crow Armstrong. So, Crawford, why don't you start here on the Zach Veen front? And if I can, for people, Zach Veen was 9th on Clegg's. So I got to look over 6 on Crawford's and 4 on mine. And I was immensely, you said you're not sure about the speed. I actually felt confirmation from the speed and watching him in the AFL and how he approached the base paths, how he stole. And we had the new rules in place in the AFL. He was a monster. He was an absolute monster. But, where are your thoughts on Zach Veen? Because you do have him on this list.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a fan. And I think, just to clarify, like on the speed thing, I don't think he's like putting up like Molina Brothers speed totals or anything like that. What he does is his acumen is he's kind of like Kyle Tucker in that regard. He's not the guy who puts up these massive 40 or 60-yard dash times. He is that type of guy who can certainly run, but he reads pitchers so well. I think the Coors effect is something that you have to keep in mind with Veen. Like the fact that he's still tapping into the power pretty obviously. Like it hasn't really shown up a ton in games. It's actually played in some kind of tough ballparks in terms of power for that type of ability, but I think everything is here for him to be a guy who can contribute in 4 to 5 categories. I don't think the Rockies are going to be super aggressive with him this year. I would imagine he starts out in Double-A, maybe gets a chance for that cup of coffee, but I would imagine he's a big part of their plans for 2024. And Coors Field, with the ability to steal bases, that's obviously got fantasy relevancy.
Yeah, and Clegg, Pete Crow Armstrong, I had it 6, Crawford had it 5, and you had it 8. This is another one of those guys. He put up monster numbers this year, counting stats and homers combined, I believe over 40. He's healthy. He makes insanely good contact. What's actually interesting about him is I think there were some similarities early on with Veen and with Pete Crow Armstrong as far as like hitting across their body. There's a lot of people that did not believe that Pete Crow Armstrong was going to be able to develop into power, and he did because he was a high contact hitter and he put up monster counting stats. He feels sometimes like he's a little far behind, but again, Cubs need new breed of players. Brendan Davis is probably going to be exhausting this year, but Pete Crow Armstrong does feel like a guy that can come up in September, and we all have him on the list.
Yeah, I do want to hit on Veen real quick because I was kind of out on the speed thing too and thought it was overblown. But in the AFL, like you notice, he reads pitchers so well, and his stride is so long. Like his legs are so long, he just like glides down the base path. Yeah, and so like I do think that speed can stick. Probably not to the level that he's doing right now, obviously, but there's some intriguing speed there. But with Pete Crow Armstrong, I just think it's a really well-rounded profile, and we saw that last year. And in low A, Myrtle Beach is in a really tough place to hit, actually. And he kind of seemed to beat that with power that we didn't expect him to have. And the EV numbers are really good. The contact numbers are good. He is a little aggressive swinger. Like he chases a little bit. The swing is like, I love the swing. He had an 80% zone swing percentage, which I think is awesome. But he chased a little bit out of the zone. So I think that can be corrected. I mean, we are talking about, this is really his first full season per se, in the minors playing professional ball. And I thought he just impressed across the board. So I think this is like a potential 2020 type bat, home runs, stolen bases. And I think the field of hits a little bit better than, some scouting grades have given him. So I think he's just going to be a solid contributor across the board. Maybe never a stud, but just a really good fantasy asset to have on your teams.
Yeah, and I'm really open to Pete Crow and Zach Veen being really interesting guys that could be near the top of this list, assuming they're going to be given a job in 2024. So whatever they do this season, if it doesn't exhaust, these would be the type of guys we look at. We're like, I don't think Veen would be Garrett Mitchell, but I also don't think he would be Corbin Carroll. And kind of this, I actually think Pete Crow Armstrong's upside on the power has a chance to be more like Corbin Carroll value. So, keep an eye on those guys. These are called the duos. they only showed up on 2 of our lists. There were 3 players. So one person left them off for whatever reason they would be. The 3 players are Yuri Perez with the Marlins, Evan Carter with the Texas Rangers, and Ricky Tiedemann with the Blue Jays. So 2 people had him, 1 did not. Crawford, let's start with you. Just pick one of these guys that you want to talk about. I don't believe you had Yuri Perez or Tiedemann on. I think you were the outlier on both of those players. So you have
Right.
Evan Carter. So if you want to do a quick hit on them, you can, but I'd like you to focus maybe on one player, and maybe it's Carter since you had him on the list.
Sure. Yeah, I can do Carter. Like a guy that I know that when he was drafted, a lot of people said, "Who the hell is this guy?" And they're not saying that anymore. Like he's tooled up and he has a real chance. I think what's interesting about him is that I think he's one of those guys who's the rare guy who's high floor and high ceiling. Like it's very easy for me to see him being like a 270, 20 homer guy who contributes some stolen bases. It's easy for me to see him being a guy who's like 290, 30, and hitting in the middle of that order as well. That's what I really like about ranking Evan Carter. And by the way, just real quick on the pitchers, I think Perez gets exhaust eligibility.
Okay.
And Tiedemann, just real quick on me, I like him a lot. I think he might be a better real life pitcher than a fantasy pitcher, but he is a guy considered for the bottom of the list.
I fall in love with sometimes real life pitchers that might be better than fantasy. Shane McClanahan could have fallen into that, except he was like the best fantasy pitcher in the first half of the season last year. And then he kind of fell off. I really like Tiedemann. I struggle with that with Yuri Perez. I think I'm the highest of all of us on Yuri Perez because I'm not sure if he breaks camp. I still think it would be hyper aggressive, but he's working with Sandy Alcantara. It's a possibility. Someone in the chat said the same thing. This is why it's not a definitive list. Like I'm assuming he's not going to exhaust. Maybe he has a little bit more push at AA, AAA, and then maybe on the back end of the season, they want to get a few innings. They might even want to press him in the AFL. So that was my kind of designation to it. I also want to throw out with Evan Carter. If we were to throw around a Kyle Tucker comp, it's Evan Carter for me, not Zach Veen, because Evan Carter can have a little bit more. I watch a lot of him. I live next to the Surprise Stadium, and I get to see the Royals and Rangers a lot, and I watch him a ton, and he's got a little bit more of an upright, longer approach swing with better bat speed. He can run. It's very Kyle Tuckerish, which gets you exciting. So Clegg, same thing, those 3 names. I'm trying to remember. I don't think maybe you had Yuri Perez on or I don't remember who you didn't have on your list, but pick one of those guys that you want to talk about between Yuri, Evan Carter, and Tiedemann. I know you had Tiedemann.
Yeah, I had Tiedemann and Yuri on there. Carter, I'm just not sure how aggressive they are with him, to be honest. I'm not sure if he's like a mid-2024 guy. I will say Carter was the best player I saw in high A all season and in about 30-plus live games. I mean, just 5-tool across the board, I think. Excellent center field, excellent arm. He just literally glides out there, steals bases with ease. The power's coming, so I love Carter. I think Tiedemann, there's talk that he could pitch this year with the Jays, and who knows? I mean, they may be hyper aggressive with him. I don't see it personally.
Me too.
So that's, to me, like it's more of a 2024 thing. I know he made it to AA last year. I think he's going to spend, the first half in AA and then get some time in AAA to end the year. And maybe he gets a start or 2 at the end of the year. I have no idea, but I do think that he's still eligible for 2024. And you mentioned, I mean, maybe he's a better real life arm. I'm not sure, but the arsenal was just excellent between the fastball, slider, and changeup. All are plus pitches at least, and we saw those results last year. I mean, the K rates were elite. The walk rates, I mean, could tick down a bit, but even if he hovers in the 9 to 10% range, like we can live there if he's striking out a ton of guys and posting decent ratios. So I'm not going to be upset by that at all. Just misses a ton of bats. And so I think Tiedemann will be one of the top rookie pitchers for 2024, just because I don't think he gets up this year or exhaust eligibility.
And that's what's tough about this. I mean, because, my top pitcher on my list is Yuri Perez because I don't think he exhausts. It's funny. Someone just brought up, one of my favorite, I've been going nuts about it, but Brandon Pfaadt with the Diamondbacks, he's going to exhaust his prospect eligibility. That's the dance we're doing. Grayson, gone. Andrew Painter, gone. Brandon Pfaadt, gone. I assume there's a potential Gavin Williams and Kyle Harrison are gone off of that list as well. They would be on there. So there's a lot to kind of deal with pitching. Pitching is really finicky here. None of us last year would have expected that the Phillies would be open to Andrew Painter actually breaking camp with the team, but he's an unreal guy. Yeah. This last one is called the Lone Dog. And then we'll look at the master list pending time here. This is the Lone Dog where each of us, ironically, had 2 players that no one else had. These were just our solo gets here. So Clegg, let's start with you. You had Curtis Mead, who's been part of this conversation. Again, I don't have him because of exhaustibility. I believe you've got him on here. You have him at 6. And you also had Daniel Espino, who could be one of the best pitchers in baseball, but has struggled with injuries.
Yeah.
But I kind of like the aggressiveness of this one, because if Espino's healthy this year, everyone, when Painter's gone and Grayson's gone, Espino's going to be back in the conversation with Yuri and Ricky Tiedemann. There's no doubt about it. So real quick on your duos, your solos of 2 guys, Curtis Mead and Daniel Espino.
Mead was a super tough one to decipher whether he graduates or not. I lean on the conservative side because the Rays just aren't aggressive enough. And I think he could use some more time in AAA, even though the bat's certainly good enough. I think that they're going to use the glove. They're going to cite the glove and say that's why he needs more work. Just seems like a Rays thing to do. It does feel like Mead's been around a while, but he's just 22. So it wouldn't surprise me if he spent most of the year in AAA and then, gets the call up in August, and they kind of manipulate the plate appearances enough where he doesn't exhaust that eligibility, or just keeps the service time, under 45 days. So he doesn't go over, and they have a shot to get a Rookie of the Year candidate in 2024. But Mead is stellar. The bat is so good. Between the power, I think the power is extremely underrated. I mean, his 90th percentile EV was near 107 last year, which is just super high end for a prospect. And even by major league standards, that is really, really good. The average EV good, the zone contact really good, hard hit really good. I absolutely love Curtis Mead, but I'm just not sure. And this could be totally wrong. He could lose eligibility quickly if he has a good spring training. They bring him up. I don't know, but this is one of those where I just lean on the conservative side with the Rays just being Rays,
Sure.
So Espino, yeah, I think that if he can get healthy and bounce back, I think he's arguably the best pitching prospect in the game. Like you said, right there with Yuri Perez and Tiedemann, even if Tiedemann doesn't exhaust eligibility. So it's just going to take health for Espino to really bounce back, but the arsenal's there. I mean, I think the control command improved. I'm certainly on board with that. He just needs to show health, and we just need to know something. We all we know was the shoulder and nothing else.
Yeah.
And that's the frustrating thing. They just didn't give us anything on Daniel Espino, but
he looks good. There's some Instagram posts out there, which we're all like, all right. By the way, this about me, Curtis Mead is going to end up being like a phenomenal player, and it's always going to hurt me because anyone that's ever listened to my show knows the worst interview I ever conducted where I was just stupid was with Curtis Mead, and he was the nicest person on the planet. I asked the dumbest questions. I don't know what was wrong with me. My brain shut down. It was so stupid, and he was so kind, and I never aired the interview. I never aired it because I asked the dumbest. I just aired little snippets of it. But Curtis Mead is a great guy. Now, Crawford, yours is really fascinating, and I was excited to go through this because the 2 guys that were solo on your list, you had really high at 3 and 4, and we didn't have. One of them I gave heavy consideration into. The other I kind of didn't, but I love him. You have Marcelo Mayer at 3 on the 2024 list, which does have me reconsidering a lot. And Diego Cartaya, you had at number 4. So obviously the Red Sox are a little bit in dismay. They've got an opening at shortstop. It's just how aggressive are they going to be? I don't know that they're going to be hyper aggressive with prospects, but talk to us. Mayer at 3 and Cartaya at 4.
Yeah, and I will admit this is definitely very aggressive. And the top 2 were set for me, and then 3 through 6, I just kind of rolled around a little bit. But ultimately, I just love my ears for so much, and plenty of fantasy upside as well. A guy who hit 280, 399, 489 in his basically first full professional season, hit 30 doubles in 91 games. I think those doubles are going to start becoming homers as he gets stronger. Believe in the approach that they could play, believe that he's going to stick at shortstop. Underrated stolen base guy. I think he's 23 for 24 in his stolen base attempts in his early career. Really smart player and by no means slow. I just love the floor of this guy, and I think there's an opening here too for him. And I kind of wonder if they were less aggressive. Part of it is because they're a cheap organization, and part of it, they should not be a cheap organization, by the way. I'll get off that soapbox, but I will get back on the soapbox for Marcelo Mayer, because I think the fact that he is just about defensively, especially ready to be an everyday shortstop, I think he's going to be there and put up the good counting stats. With Cartaya, the worry for me, of course, is the fact that the Dodgers are so flippin' loaded and have so many good young players to be there. I think he's just going to force their hands, especially because I think he's going to have a monster 2023 season. His approach is so good. Chance for plus power, a good defender behind the plate. catching is always something that I can be a little too aggressive with, to be completely honest with you. Like if I see a guy who I think has that chance to be a top dozen catcher immediately, it goes up on my fantasy rankings. I believe in both bats a lot. It also wouldn't shock me whatsoever if we were talking about these guys at the top of our 2025 list.
Welsh, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Of course I did
okay.
that. Jesus. How many times have I corrected that on my
We're
podcast?
on a roll.
Jesus. We were doing so good.
That's okay.
All right. What I was going to say is I completely agree with that, by the way. The 2025 Mayor, I really struggle with. I just don't know if they're going to be hyper aggressive with him, but he kind of could belong on my list. And I think the 2025 is up. But the weird thing is I think he might be a guy that just exhausts it middle way through 2014. And he's not even there for 15. Cartaya is kind of tough. The two on my list, at number 8, I had Colton Cowser, and this is a guy that could exhaust it this year. I'm definitely open that I might be wrong, but they do have Santander. They got Hayes. They kind of got some guys. Cowser got up to AAA, didn't play a ton, played 27 games, but he had 5 homers, a little bit higher strikeout rate, and average struggled. So that's why I think this is going to be a season where he really needs to grow. And he needs to get a full AAA season in, and they're going to give him a cup of coffee at the end. And this would be a fantasy asset who's maybe not quite 5 tools. I don't know if the speed is going to, he had 16 stolen bases in high A ball. And then he didn't really steal over his next 66 games from AA on. He stole 2 bases. So I don't know where that's going to be, but 19 homers across the board. I think Cowser's someone who could be maybe one of the lower end prospects we're looking at. And then the other one is a big guess shot for me. I went with Jackson Merrill, and Jackson Merrill only hit A ball this year, but Jackson Merrill did come to the Arizona Fall League, and just people I'm around have also personally told that they are going to be hyper aggressive with him, and they are talking about him this year. Obvious things. Xander Bogaerts is there. Tatis is there. I think Merrill is going to transition into a second base spot because Xander Bogaerts can lock down that shortstop. If Tatis goes to the outfield, or regardless, if Xander were to go to third and Tatis were to stay at short, he's going to start probably making that move. The hit tool is really advanced. The defense is pretty advanced. He'd be a great defender at second base. He just needs to develop into more power. But that's why I think he's going to get a little bit more of an aggressive assignment. I would not be shocked if he went to AA, if he just moved up to AA this year. But I'm going to say Jackson Merrill was my my outside of the box guy here on all of these. Friends, we did a top 10. And I'm going to give you my top 10, and then I want to plug what you guys got going on, and I want to get your guys' top 10. So here was, if you guys want the entirety of the list, since we had different groupings here, my master list of 2024 top rookies: Jordan Lawler, Jackson Chourio, Kyle Manzardo, Zach Veen, Yuri Perez. That's the top 5. Followed by Pete Crow Armstrong at 6, Evan Carter at 7, Colton Cowser at 8, Jackson Merrill at 9, and Ricky Tiedemann at 10. Chris Crawford, will you give us your top 10 that we've got here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have Chourio at 1, Lawler at 2, Marcelo Mayer at 3, Diego Cartaya at 4, Pete Crow Armstrong at 5. 6, I have Zach Veen. 7, Evan Carter. 8, Jason Dominguez. 9, Mason Wynn. And 10, Henry Davis.
All right, Chris Clegg, what does that top 10 look like?
All right, Chourio also at 1, followed by Jordan Lawler. Then 3 through 5, Kyle Manzardo, Ricky Tiedemann, Yuri Perez. And then 6 through 10, Curtis Mead, Daniel Espino, Pete Crow Armstrong, Zach Veen, and Kyle Harrison to round it out.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is the best that we could probably give you for what 2024 might look like. Because guess what? 2023 isn't even here yet. Corbin Carroll hasn't even exhausted his eligibility. Gunnar Henry, who knows? I don't want to put anything bad on anybody. Someone gets hurt and they're still on this list. We don't know these things. This is our best guess from what I consider 2 fantastic prospect minds. Hopefully you guys enjoy some of my analysis as well. Chris Clegg, please tell everybody what you got going on and where they can find you.
Sure. So on Twitter at RotoClegg, pretty much everything gets posted there. I'm the lead dynasty analyst at PitcherList. So we're doing a lot of work there with a really good dynasty team. And then also doing some stuff at Fantasy Pros and on my own Substack, the Dynasty Dugout. So you can check that out. All my rankings are there and doing daily write-ups. So you can check that out if you'd like.
Perfect. Chris Crawford, you are now over at RotoWire with a great crew. Tell us what you're going to be doing over at RotoWire. And you've got some other cool personal stuff. I know you got a Patreon set up now. Plug whatever you want to plug.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, absolutely. You're going to see my stuff at RotoWire. Going to be doing player news mostly, but then we'll be doing some articles and some prospect stuff, I am sure. Patreon.com/prospect guides. I'm going to be doing a daily minor league newsletter and also doing some lists before the season starts. And then also for you Seattle Mariners sufferers, I just started a YouTube channel called My OY. For those of you who are Mariner fans, you can probably understand where that name comes from. But yeah, all of that good stuff. And you can follow me on Twitter at Crawford_MILB.
My friends, if you're into it, I've got a long-standing Patreon, 5+ years, inthisleague.com. If you guys want to check it out, it's where my prospect list lives, top 500 prospects, top 400 dynasty, first-year player. I do a prospect ADP I've created and I've done over time. You can find me on the In This League Fantasy Baseball podcast. And honestly, you can find me in a lot of places. I do once a week doing dynasty stuff with CBS. I'm going to be on Rates and Barrels this year over at The Athletic. So I'm in a lot of spots. I appreciate everybody's support. And I always appreciate, as I know you guys do as well, Nick's support on all of this. Prospect One, also probably the biggest, most relevant to all of this. Check out my show, inthisleague.fans, if you want to check out the hat as well. But that is it. Nick, are you back from the coffee shop?
Yeah,
There you go.
okay.
The
All
donut
right.
shop.
So
Ridiculous. I am
what is
disappointed in
ridiculous
you.
is that I chose, I'm starving here. And I think, you know what? I have the three Chris's, the people I trust the most, do not need me for a moment
Yeah.
to go off and get it. And then somehow
mute-
my phone automatically put me in the stream when I tried to go in
so funny.
backstage. And there I am getting a lovely salad.
That's beautiful.
Oh,
It
gosh.
was
So clearly
absolutely
you were
beautiful.
listening to it when you were at the place. So can you please tell
Yes.
me who my number 3 prospect was in the top 24 rookies, please?
I can't even tell you what you said in the last 5 minutes.
I'm just teasing. I'm teasing. Hey,
All
great job
all
and
I
everything you're doing
remember
today, my friend.
is that
Yeah,
I
thank
kind
you,
of
guys.
understand since I put out the Tiedemann tweet about how they purposely limited him last year, which is a massive sign that he's not going to be up early. But man, you say Kikuchi and Mitch White, like what is going on? That can't happen for the Jays. But this was a fantastic panel. You guys took exactly the way I wanted you to be like, hey, who are the ones actually going to be, setting the world afire in 2024 as a rookie? Wonderful preview. Chris, and Chris, thank you so much for
Baseball's
being
the
a part of
best.
PitchCon.
Go, Chris.
Take care, guys.
See ya.
Panel of Chris's.
All right, we